In a world where we are constantly connected, it's easy to think that we are safe. Every click, every keystroke, every message you send feels like an echo lost in a sea of data. But behind the glowing screens, in the invisible shadows of the digital landscape, a new breed of criminals lurks, silent, calculated, and unforgiving. These are not your typical burglars or robbers. No, the darkest cybercrimes are the ones that seep into your life without warning, leaving no physical trace, but a deep scar that lingers in the mind. They exploit our trust in technology, our dependence on the internet, and the very systems we rely on to keep us safe. Imagine the terror of knowing that your every move is being watched, your secrets exposed, and your identity stolen, all from a place you can't see, and worse, can't escape. The victims of these crimes aren't just numbers or names on a screen. They are real people, thrust into a nightmarish digital world, struggling to survive. In this series, we'll delve into some of the most spine-chilling, mind-bending cybercrimes that ever unfolded. These aren't just hacks. They are invasions of the deepest parts of our lives, where technology turns against us in the most horrifying ways. Are you ready to step into the darkness? Prepare yourself, because the horrors of the digital world are far worse than anything you can imagine. Welcome to the darkest cybercrimes, where reality and nightmare collide in ways you can't escape. The dark web's whisper. It all started in the dead of night, when the world was quiet, and only a few souls were still awake. The hum of electricity ran through the quiet streets of London, as people rested in the safety of their homes, unaware that something unspeakable was happening just beneath the surface of the internet. James, a cybersecurity expert, had spent his entire life building firewalls, encrypting sensitive data, and tracking down hackers. He was used to the darker corners of the web, to the twisted minds that lurked in places most people never dared to venture. But tonight was different. Something had changed. The email had come with no warning. A strange subject line, simple yet cryptic. Do you want to see something real? James had a policy: never open unknown emails. But there was something about this one, an unease gnawing at him that forced his hand. His fingers trembled as he clicked the message open. The contents were bare. Nothing but a single link: http://darkweb-ghost.com. He sat frozen for a moment, staring at the screen, his mind racing. The dark web was a place of shadows, a place where no one should venture unless they were prepared for the worst. But James had seen it all. He had fought off hackers, dismantled networks, and hunted criminals who used the dark web for the most unspeakable things. Still, something about this felt different. James hesitated, but curiosity won. He opened the link. The moment the page loaded, his screen went black. The silence in the room felt suffocating, oppressive. A cold chill crept over him, and he shivered. A simple line of text appeared on the screen: "Welcome to the real world." Before James could react, the screen flickered to life again, but it wasn't the normal interface he was used to. The page was dark, deeply black, almost too dark to comprehend. The text was jumbled, glitching in and out of focus. And then it happened. A face appeared, ghostly pale, eyes wide and staring directly at him. James gasped, stumbling back in his chair. The face on his screen didn't move. It was unnervingly still, as if the very essence of the person had been frozen, trapped in some unearthly space. But the eyes, those eyes, they moved. Slowly. They blinked. And then the message appeared: "You shouldn't have come here." Panic surged through James's chest. He tried to close the window, but the mouse was unresponsive. His keyboard locked up. He pulled at the cords of his computer, yanking them from the wall, but the screen kept flickering, showing images that were far too real, too haunting. A video began to play, grainy and unclear at first, but as the seconds ticked by, the image became clearer. It was a recording of a man sitting in a dark room shackled to a chair. His eyes were wide with terror. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. Then a figure, shadowed and dark, entered the frame. The figure held a knife, and with one swift motion, it was over. The man's screams never made it out, and the screen cut to black. James's pulse thundered in his ears. Sweat dripped down his face. This wasn't possible. What was he seeing? The video played out more. Images of horror, suffering, and anguish that seemed far too real to be part of some sick prank. And then, the page went black again. A new message appeared. "You're next." Fear gripped James's heart. He reached for his phone to call his colleagues, but the device was dead. The room seemed to close in on him, as if the walls were pressing in, squeezing him tighter. Suddenly the phone rang. The eerie sound of the ringtone echoed through the silence of the room. James picked it up, but no one spoke. The line was empty, and the air was thick with tension. He could hear something faintly like a whisper, though it was hard to make out. "I see you," came a distorted voice, so quiet, so low that James could barely hear it. But he could feel it, creeping into his skin, sinking into his thoughts. "I'm watching." With a rush of adrenaline, he ripped the phone from his ear and slammed it onto the table. His mind raced, his breaths coming shallow. Who was doing this? How were they tracking him? How had they gotten into his system, into his life? The room around him felt suffocating, the walls warping in unnatural ways. He could feel a presence, something outside of him, pressing against the very fabric of his being. And then the screen flickered again. There, in the center of the monitor, was a simple message. "We are always watching." He stood up, eyes wide, heart racing. He had to get out of the apartment. He had to get away from this, from whatever it was. But the door wouldn't open. He pushed and pulled, but the handle wouldn't budge. It was locked, from the outside. A sudden realization hit him like a wave. He wasn't alone. The room was filled with a cold presence, a feeling of being surrounded by something unseen, something that didn't belong. It was in the shadows, in the whispers, in the silence. The phone rang again, but this time James didn't answer. The room grew colder. The darkness seemed to deepen. The walls were no longer solid. They moved, breathed. They were alive. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out entirely. His vision went black. Then he heard the whispers. Low, guttural, barely audible, but unmistakably close. It wasn't just in his ears. It was inside his mind. "You've seen the truth." And in the pitch black, something whispered directly into his ear. "Now, we have you." When his colleagues arrived the next morning, they found his apartment door wide open. The computer was on, the screen still glowing, but James was nowhere to be found. Not a single sign of him, not a trace of a struggle. The only thing left behind was a chilling message on the screen. "We are always watching." Later, when the authorities looked into the incident, they discovered the terrifying truth. The email James had opened, the link he had clicked, it was all part of something much darker. It was a baited trap set up by a group on the dark web, a group known for creating disturbing, realistic simulations and blackmailing those who dared to look into their operations. The faces, the figures, everything was a part of an intricate psychological game. But there was more, far more. The group was not content with just hacking people's computers or stealing their data. They had a chilling goal: to make people disappear for good. James had seen too much, and he paid the price. Months later, as investigators dug deeper into the dark web's underbelly, They realized something horrifying. James wasn't the only one. There had been others. People who clicked on innocuous links, people who thought they could handle the darkness. And each time they disappeared, the message remained. We are always watching. The ghosts behind the screen. The night was eerily quiet, and the hum of the city outside seemed miles away, as if it were trying to keep its distance from the building's dark secrets. Sarah Collins, a skilled IT specialist, had always been a perfectionist, diligent, careful, and meticulous in her work. She was used to solving problems that would make most people cringe, diagnosing crashes, patching security holes, and protecting sensitive data. But tonight, something felt different. Sarah had just finished her shift at a major financial firm in the heart of the city. It was after hours, the building mostly empty, with only the soft flickering of fluorescent lights guiding her down the narrow hallways. But as she passed her desk, she noticed something odd. A new notification on her workstation. New login detected. She frowned, moving closer to her screen. It was an alert from the internal security software, a feature she had implemented herself. It should have been impossible for an unauthorized user to gain access. The system was tightly monitored, the most secure the company had ever been. There was no way someone could have bypassed the layers of encryption she had set up. She clicked on the alert. A login had been made from an IP address she didn't recognize. But it wasn't just the login itself that unsettled her. It was the time of access, 2:17 a.m. Nobody should have been in the system at that hour, especially not with such an obscure IP address. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she contemplated her next move. It was probably some harmless glitch, she reasoned. But even as she tried to reassure herself, an unsettling thought slithered into her mind. What if someone had gotten in? What if the system had been breached? She began to trace the IP address, following the trail through the system logs. But the deeper she went, the more she felt the presence of something unnatural, something wrong. The IP led to an anonymous server, one that appeared as though it was designed to hide its true origins, an untraceable source. It was the digital equivalent of a ghost haunting her system, slipping through the cracks, evading every attempt to catch it. Suddenly her screen flickered, and a strange message appeared. I'm here. Her heart skipped a beat. It was the kind of message that shouldn't have been possible, a message from inside her own system, as if it had been written by a ghost that knew her every move. Sarah froze. This wasn't just some hacker trying to steal a few files. This felt different. Personal. She quickly scanned the security logs again, but the intruder was no longer in the system. There were no traces, no footprints left behind. It was as if they had vanished completely, like a shadow that slipped through the cracks of the real world. Then the message reappeared, but this time it was more direct, more chilling. I see you. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't a prank. Whoever or whatever was behind this knew exactly where she was, knew exactly what she was doing. Panic began to settle in. She reached for her phone to call her supervisor, but the screen was black. The phone was dead, unresponsive. She tried restarting it, but it didn't work. It was as though the device itself had been severed from reality, as though everything around her had been infected by the same malevolent force that had breached her system. The lights above her flickered erratically. The quiet hum of the building seemed to fade, replaced by a sickening silence. She looked around. The office, usually filled with the soft murmur of co-workers and the clattering of keyboards, now felt oppressive. The walls seemed to close in on her. Her computer screen blinked once more, and the message changed. I'm inside. It wasn't just in her system anymore. It was in her mind. Sarah tried to disconnect the computer, but the power wouldn't shut off. She yanked the cable from the wall, but it didn't stop. The screen continued to pulse with that insidious message. "I'm here. I see you. You're mine." Sweat broke out across her forehead. This was no longer about the system, no longer about data or security. This was a game, a twisted, sinister game, and she was the prey. The room around her felt too cold now, the air growing thin as if the building itself were suffocating under the weight of whatever presence had infected it. She grabbed her coat and bolted for the exit, but the hallway stretched out before her, longer than she had ever remembered. It was as though the space itself had expanded, growing dark and endless, each step she took pulling her further away from escape. And then she heard it. A sound. Quiet at first, like a whisper, but growing louder with each passing second. It came from the walls, from the very air itself. "I see you, Sarah. I know your every move. I will never let you go." Her breath quickened, her heart pounding in her chest. Her mind raced. How was this possible? Who or what was doing this? She ran down the hallway, but no matter how fast she moved, the exit door seemed further away, slipping beyond her grasp. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, until it filled the space around her, vibrating through her bones. The door to the stairwell, the only way out, slammed shut in front of her. She pulled at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. She felt trapped, as though the walls were closing in, as though the building itself was alive, watching her, feeding off her fear. And then the screen appeared in front of her again, suspended in midair like some haunting apparition. "You're mine, now and forever." A sudden, overwhelming urge overtook her. She reached for the screen, desperate to break the connection, to sever whatever dark force had invaded her life. She pressed her palm against the cold glass of the monitor, feeling the electric hum pulse beneath her fingertips. In an instant, the world seemed to collapse. The lights went out completely, plunging her into total darkness. And then, silence. The building was still, the air thick with a suffocating weight. When Sarah's colleagues arrived at the office the next morning, they found her desk exactly as it had been left, unattended, the computer still running, the monitor flickering with the words, "You're mine." Sarah was never found. The security footage showed her walking down the hall, but no further. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Weeks later, the company discovered the horrifying truth behind the breach. The attack was traced back to a dark web group, one specializing in extortion and psychological manipulation. But they weren't after money. They had a different goal altogether. This group, known only as the Ghosts, had developed a method of infiltrating systems and psychologically targeting individuals, slowly driving them mad with fear and isolation. They had taken control of Sarah's system not for her data, but for her mind. They had infected her with their presence, and she had become their prey. The last thing Sarah's colleagues found on the system was a chilling message left in the security logs. "You were warned. Now you're one of us." The company shut down immediately after, but the darkness that had infiltrated Sarah's life remained, lingering in the very code of the system itself. And somewhere, in the deepest recesses of the dark web, the Ghosts waited, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to wander into their grasp. The Silent Infiltration. It was the season of holiday shopping, the busiest time of the year. Stores were packed with eager shoppers, eyes glued to the discounts, filled with the excitement of wrapping gifts and preparing for the celebrations ahead. But in the heart of a major retailer's headquarters, something far darker was brewing. A silent storm was approaching. John Miller, a network security analyst at Target, had been working late into the night, monitoring their systems for any signs of intrusion. He had been trained to expect the unexpected, but this time felt different. A feeling of unease gnawed at the back of his mind. The servers hummed as usual, the codes scrolling across his screen. But something was wrong. He sat at his desk, scanning through the usual logs, checking for any anomalies. He noticed a few unusual spikes in network activity, but nothing that screamed breach. Yet the unease persisted. The traffic didn't make sense. These were unusual patterns, ones that didn't belong. He couldn't put his finger on it, but there was a subtle foreignness to the traffic, as if it was being channeled through another source. And it wasn't just random packets. It was specific, precise. He dug deeper. Minutes passed. Then a shiver ran down his spine as the firewall logs began to update. A string of incoming traffic from a location he didn't recognize. Ukraine. At first, he thought it was just a fluke, maybe a miscommunication, but his instincts told him otherwise. Why Ukraine? The anomaly was too deliberate, too methodical. John froze as his screen blinked. A message popped up from an internal chat room. It wasn't from any of his colleagues. The screen displayed a cryptic message. "We're in." He quickly checked the server logs again. The encryption keys had been compromised. No way. How could this have happened? The breach shouldn't have been possible. His systems were solid. His firewalls, his safeguards, everything had been meticulously configured. But someone had found a way in. John's fingers shook as he tried to track the source of the attack. It was too late to stop it. His eyes widened in horror as he realized the full scope of what was happening. The intruders had gained access to Target's payment processing system. The very core of the company's network was now under their control. But it wasn't just an ordinary breach. These hackers weren't simply stealing data. They had a far more insidious goal: to create a network of chaos, a digital hellscape. As he watched in real time, the intruders began their work. Card data from millions of customers, names, addresses, credit card numbers, were being siphoned off in secret. It was happening with terrifying speed. The hackers moved quickly, efficiently, as if they had done this before, and John realized with a sickening feeling that they had. The traffic was spreading through every aisle of the network, tunneling through the very fiber of the system like an unseen virus. John's mind raced. How long had they been in? Weeks? Months? The hackers weren't in a hurry. They were patient. The breach had been hidden in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He quickly alerted his team, but it was too late. The attackers had set up a back door, a hidden channel that couldn't be detected by traditional security measures. It was like a ghost in the system, an unseen presence, a parasite slowly draining the lifeblood of the company. John's heart pounded in his chest as the breach spread like wildfire. He tried everything, tried to isolate the systems, block the connections, but it was as if the hackers were one step ahead. They adapted. They were everywhere. The network was no longer his to control. He was watching a nightmare unfold, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. And then came the final blow. The message on his screen flickered again. "You didn't notice. Now we own you." The phrase sent a cold shiver through his body. They were inside. They knew everything. His work, his life, his every move. They had made him an unwitting accomplice in their digital heist. And now they were in control. John couldn't breathe. He stared at the message, feeling his world collapse. This wasn't just about money. This wasn't even about data. It was a power play. A dark, haunting game. The hackers moved quickly now, draining bank accounts, transferring funds, and quietly disappearing into the void. In the span of a few hours, millions of dollars worth of personal information had been stolen. The digital damage was done. John tried to alert his superiors, but the company's network had been locked down, like a coffin sealing its occupant inside. No one could access the critical files. No one could communicate. It was as if the company had been swallowed whole by the void of the dark web. The next morning, when the world woke up, they didn't know what had happened yet. To the customers, it was just another shopping day, except for the erratic behavior of their credit card statements. They noticed strange charges, fraudulent purchases, mysterious withdrawals. But John knew. He knew the real horror. By the time the company realized the scale of the breach, it was already too late. The attackers had vanished without a trace, their digital footprints scrubbed clean from the system. The damage had been done, but no one could say exactly how or when they had entered. The breach was the largest in retail history. Over 40 million credit and debit card numbers had been stolen, along with the personal information of another 70 million customers. It wasn't just a robbery. It was a terror campaign, a slow, methodical, invisible attack that tore through the company's core. Months later, an investigation revealed that the attack had started with an entry point that seemed almost too simple. A phishing email had been sent to an employee working with a third-party vendor. That email had contained a link that, once clicked, installed malware on the network. The hackers had then used that access to gain control of target systems. And the worst part? The company hadn't even realized the breach for weeks. By the time they had caught on, the hackers had already exfiltrated the data and disappeared into the shadows of the dark web. John was left with a broken company, millions of affected customers, and a haunting truth. The breach had never been fully contained. Every system, every part of the infrastructure, was now a potential entry point. The attackers had left something behind, a trail of digital destruction, and now it was only a matter of time before they returned.